They called him Nomad, a lone rider whose leather cut bore the death's head patch that commanded respect on every highway in America. When 5 men from the Petrov crime family cornered him in a parking lot outside Reno, they thought they'd found an easy mark. They had no idea they'd just declared war on an entire brotherhood. What happened next would echo through the criminal underworld for years to come, a lesson written in blood and thunder about the price of touching one of their own. Nomad had been riding for 37 years, his face weathered like desert stone, his eyes holding the kind of quiet intensity that comes from 1,000 miles of solitude and reflection. The November wind cut through Reno's industrial district as he pulled his Harley into the cracked asphalt lot of Murphy's Auto Parts, the setting sun painting the Nevada sky in shades of crimson and gold. His motorcycle, a 1998 Heritage Softail, wore its age with dignity, chrome still gleaming despite 2 decades of hard miles and harder weather. The auto parts store sat wedged between abandoned warehouses, their broken windows like empty eye sockets staring down at the forgotten neighborhood. Nomad needed a replacement alternator belt, nothing more, nothing less. He killed the engine, the sudden silence broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 80. He didn't see them approach at first. 5 men emerging from a black Escalade parked 3 spaces over, their movements coordinated, predatory. Expensive suits stretched across shoulders built for violence, gold chains catching the dying light. The leader was a man named Yuri Petrov, nephew of the family patriarch, 28 years old and drunk on inherited power. His dark hair was slicked back, his smile sharp as broken glass. Behind him stood his cousin Alexei and 3 enforcers, Dimitri, Konstantin, and a man they called Butcher for reasons that needed no explanation. "Nice bike, old man," Yuri called out, his accent thick with Eastern European consonants. "How much you want for it?" Nomad turned slowly, his movements deliberate, economical. He read the situation in an instant, the way their hands hovered near concealed weapons, the confident cruelty in their eyes. These were men accustomed to shearing the word no. "Not for sale," Nomad said, his voice graveled from years of wind and weather. He turned back toward the store entrance, dismissing them with the simple act of walking away. That was when Alexei made his first mistake. He grabbed Nomad's shoulder, spinning him around. The second mistake followed immediately. His fist aimed at Nomad's jaw. Nomad moved like water, slipping the punch and driving his elbow into Alexei's ribs with precision born of military training decades old. The younger man doubled over, gasping. But numbers have their own cruel mathematics, and 5 against 1 carries an inevitable conclusion. Dimitri's fist caught Nomad's temple, sending stars exploding across his vision. Konstantin followed with a kidney punch that drove the air from his lungs. Nomad fought like a cornered wolf, landing blows that would have dropped lesser men, his fists carrying the weight of hard miles and harder years. He broke Butcher's nose with a straight right that sprayed blood across expensive silk. He drove Konstantin to his knees with a kick that would leave the man walking with a limp for months. But the math remained unforgiving. They surrounded him, a coordinated assault of fists and boots. He tasted copper, felt ribs crack, watched the Nevada sky spin overhead as they drove him to the ground. The asphalt was cold against his back, rough against his leather cut, the sacred patch that marked him as untouchable, inviolate. Yuri stood over him, breathing hard, knuckles split and bleeding. "You should have sold the bike, old man," he spat, literally and figuratively. "Now we take it anyway, and you learn to respect your betters." They took his wallet, his keys, his phone. They left him bleeding on the pavement as the Escalade's engine roared to life. Nomad watched through swelling eyes as they loaded his Harley into a covered trailer they'd backed up. The theft clearly premeditated, professional. The taillights disappeared into the gathering dusk, and silence returned to the abandoned lot like a cold blanket. For 10 minutes, Nomad lay still, taking inventory of his injuries. 3 cracked ribs, possibly 4. Split lip, blackening eye, kidney bruised but functional. Nothing that wouldn't heal, nothing that would stop him. He rolled to his side, gasping at the pain, and pushed himself to his knees. The world tilted, steadied, resolved into sharp focus. Inside Murphy's Auto Parts, old Murphy himself called the police, called an ambulance. But Nomad made one additional call from the store's landline, his fingers steady, despite the blood dripping from his knuckles. He called his charter president, a man named Forge who'd ridden beside him for 20 years. The conversation lasted 37 seconds. Nomad spoke calmly, clinically, providing names, descriptions, plate numbers committed to memory even in the chaos of the beating. When Forge spoke, his voice carried the weight of granite grinding against steel. "Brother," Forge said, and in that single word lived a promise older than laws, deeper than blood. "We're coming." Nomad refused the ambulance. He let the police take their report, gave them everything except the one detail that mattered, the fact that he'd made that phone call. The officers were sympathetic but realistic. Car theft, assault, likely connected to organized crime. The Petrovs had money, lawyers, connections that reached into City Hall and beyond. Justice, they implied without saying, was a complicated thing in Reno. Murphy drove Nomad to the emergency room in his ancient pickup truck. The old mechanic's hands gentle on the wheel, his silence speaking volumes of respect and rage. The ER doctor, a tired woman named Chen, wrapped his ribs and stitched his lip with expert efficiency. "You should press charges," Dr. Chen said, not looking up from her work. "File a civil suit. Men like that shouldn't get away with this." Nomad said nothing. Justice was coming, but not the kind that lived in courtrooms. They kept him overnight for observation, the hospital's fluorescent lights harsh against his closed eyelids, the steady beep of monitors marking time like a countdown. Somewhere out there in the darkness, his brothers were riding. He could almost hear the thunder of their approach, feel it in his bones like approaching weather. The Petrov family operated out of a compound in the hills west of Reno, a sprawling estate that old Mikhail Petrov had built with money from loan sharking, protection rackets, and worse. Yuri celebrated his victory that night in the compound's game room, showing off the Harley to his uncle, spinning tales of the beating they'd administered, each retelling adding flourishes of violence and dominance. Mikhail Petrov was 73, his empire built on brutal pragmatism and ruthless efficiency. He examined the stolen Harley with cold eyes, noting the death's head patch on the seat, the charter designation stitched into worn leather. "Whose bike?" Mikhail asked in Russian, his voice soft, dangerous. "Some old nobody," Yuri answered, switching to English with dismissive ease. "Lone rider, nobody around to that patch," Mikhail interrupted, his finger hovering over, but not touching the insignia. "You know what it means?" Yuri's smile faltered. Alexei, nursing his bruised ribs, straightened slightly. The three enforcers exchanged glances. "It's a biker gang, Uncle," Yuri said, confidence wavering. "We've dealt with, not a gang," Mikhail said, each word carefully weighted. "A brotherhood. 1%. Do you understand what you've done?" The silence that followed carried the weight of dawning comprehension and growing dread. Mikhail Petrov had survived 5 decades in the criminal underworld by knowing which wars to fight and which to avoid. He'd seen what happened to organizations that crossed certain lines, violated certain codes. The patch on that motorcycle represented something older and more dangerous than law, more binding than blood. But before Mikhail could speak further, before he could order his nephew to return the bike and pray for mercy, the night itself seemed to change. A sound rose in the distance, low at first, then building like approaching thunder. The rumble of engines, dozens of them, scores of them, rolling up the highway like judgment itself. Forge led them, his road name earned through 30 years of bending, but never breaking, forging bonds that held when everything else shattered. Behind him rode more than 80 brothers and sisters from 3 different charters, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting prey. They'd converged from Sacramento, from Carson City, from as far south as Las Vegas, answering the call with the kind of loyalty that defies rational explanation. Beside Forge rode Tempest, the charter's enforcer, a woman whose quiet strength had ended more fights than most men would start in a lifetime. Behind them came Gunner and Crossbow, Widow and Phoenix, names earned through trials that sorted the pretenders from the true. Road names that carried weight in every bar and clubhouse from California to Montana. They didn't call ahead. They didn't negotiate. They rode straight through the compound's iron gates, engines roaring like dragons awakening, the sound echoing off the hills and rattling windows in their frames. The gate security tried to stop them, found themselves overwhelmed by sheer numbers and absolute determination. In the game room, Yuri Petrov's face went white as the rumble grew deafening. Through the windows he watched headlights fill the courtyard, watched leather-clad figures dismount in coordinated silence, their movements carrying the precision of military operations and the purpose of righteous fury. Forge didn't knock. He simply walked through the door that Tempest kicked open, splinters of expensive hardwood scattering across imported marble floors. Behind him came the tide of leather and chrome, filling the compound's entrance hall with the smell of engine oil and road dust and barely contained violence. "Where is he?" Forge's voice carried through the cavernous space, not shouting, not needing to. Authority lived in those 3 words, the kind that couldn't be purchased or inherited, only earned through years of keeping promises and honoring codes that most people didn't understand. Mikhail Petrov appeared at the top of the staircase, flanked by his security, his face carved from granite and calculation. He was old enough to remember when codes meant something, when certain lines weren't crossed because the consequences transcended law and entered the realm of inevitable retribution. "Your brother," Mikhail said in heavily accented English, each word a negotiation. "He is alive, injured but alive. The bike is here, untouched beyond the theft. My nephew." He glanced toward the game room where Yuri hid. "He is young, stupid. He did not know." "Ignorance," Tempest said from Forge's side, her voice carrying the weight of desert wind and winter storms, "isn't innocence. Your family beat our brother, stole his bike, left him bleeding in a parking lot. There are consequences for that. There have to be." The standoff stretched across seconds that felt like hours, the air thick with potential violence, the kind that once released cannot be contained or controlled. 80 bikers against perhaps 25 security personnel, mathematics that favored neither side because once blood started flowing, everyone lost something irreplaceable. Mikhail Petrov was many things, but foolish wasn't among them. He'd built his empire through knowing when to fight and when to negotiate, when violence served his purposes and when it merely accelerated his destruction. "Name your terms," Mikhail said, descending the stairs slowly, his hands visible, his security tense but holding their positions. "What will satisfy this debt?" Forge looked at Tempest, at the brothers and sisters who'd answered the call without hesitation. He thought of Nomad lying in a hospital bed, ribs cracked, pride intact. He thought about the code they lived by, the one that said you don't abandon your own, you don't let injustice stand unchallenged. "The bike returned," Forge said, counting on his fingers like tallying a grocery list. "Full payment for repairs, for medical bills, for pain and suffering. $50,000 cash. The men who did this, they apologize, on their knees, in front of everyone here, and you, old man, you make sure every crew from here to Sacramento knows. We are not marks. We are not easy targets. Touch one of ours, you answer to all of us." Mikhail considered, calculated, weighed options against outcomes. The money meant nothing to him, less than he'd spent on his granddaughter's birthday party. The apology would bruise his nephew's pride, but pride healed faster than the war that would come otherwise. "Agreed," Mikhail said, "on one condition. You take the bike, the money, the apology, and this ends here. No retaliation, no escalation. The debt is settled, the books balanced." Forge extended his hand. They shook like generals signing a treaty, surrounded by armies poised on the edge of battle. And with that handshake, the tension began to ease, violence trickling away like water finding new channels. Yuri Petrov emerged from the game room, pushed forward by his uncle's pointed glare and iron command. Behind him came Alexei and the 3 enforcers, their confidence from hours ago evaporated like morning dew under desert sun. They approached the assembled bikers like men walking to gallows, their steps hesitant, their faces showing the first real understanding of what they'd invited into their lives. Forge stood silent, arms crossed, as one by one the 5 men who'd beaten Nomad dropped to their knees on the cold marble floor. Yuri's jaw clenched so tight his teeth should have cracked. Alexei's face burned with humiliation. Butcher, Dimitri. Konstantin, men who'd built reputations on violence and intimidation, knelt before the assembled brotherhood, and spoke words that tasted like poison. "We apologize," Yuri forced out, each syllable extracted like a tooth. "For the TSLA, for the theft, for the disrespect. We didn't know. We were wrong." The words hung in the air, witnessed by scores of eyes, burned into memory. The kind of story that would spread through every bar and back room where criminals gathered and codes were weighed against conveniences. Tempest pulled out her phone, recorded the apology, 37 seconds of documentation that would ensure compliance, that would serve as insurance against future stupidity. The video would circulate through encrypted channels, a lesson and a warning wrapped in digital permanence. Mikhail's men brought the Harley out, wheeled it into the entrance hall like returning stolen religious relics to a cathedral. They brought a duffel bag heavy with cash, 50s and 100s bundled in neat stacks that totaled exactly $50,000. No negotiation, no haggling, the price of peace paid in full. Forge inspected the bike, running his hands over chrome and leather with the tenderness of examining a wounded brother. Superficial scratches on the primary cover, nothing structural, nothing that wouldn't Polish out. He nodded to gunner and crossbow, who wheeled it outside where a trailer waited, brought just for this purpose. "The medical bills," Mikhail added, producing a business card for one of his lawyers. "Send them to this man, every penny covered. Physical therapy if needed, pain medication, anything your brother requires. And one more thing," Forge said, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less forceful. "There's a man named Murphy, runs an auto parts store where this happened. Good man, helped our brother when he was bleeding. Your family, you make sure nothing bad happens to his business. Ever. Consider him under our protection, which means he's under yours too now. Understood?" Mikhail nodded. "Understood. Murphy's auto parts becomes untouchable. I'll spread the word." The Brotherhood filed out as they'd arrived, with purpose and coordination, engines firing up in sequence like a mechanical symphony. They rode down from the compound in formation, their headlights carving through the night, the rumble of their departure fading slowly like thunder rolling away across distant hills. At the hospital, Nomad woke to the sound of that familiar rumble, felt it in his chest before he heard it with his ears. He smiled through split lips, wincing at the pain, knowing without being told that his brothers had answered the call. Through his window he watched them fill the parking lot, dozens of motorcycles gleaming under sodium lights, and in their midst, loaded on a trailer, his own Harley returned. Forge came to his room alone, moving quietly despite his size, settling into the visitor's chair with the creak of leather and the wheeze of springs protesting weight they weren't designed to hold. He said nothing at first, just sat there in the fluorescent dimness. Two men who'd ridden together through storms and sunlight, through good times and lean, connected by something deeper than words could adequately express. "They apologized," Forge finally said. "On their knees in front of everyone. 50,000 for your trouble. Bike's back, barely scratched. Medical bills covered, Murphy's protected. The old man, the uncle, he understood what his nephew had done. Made it right." Nomad nodded slowly, each movement sending aches rippling through bruised flesh. "Didn't need the money," he said. "Didn't need the apology, not really. But they needed to give it. Needed to understand." "That's the point, brother," Forge replied. "That's always the point. We don't ride alone, even when we're riding alone. They touch one of us. They answer to all of us. That's not a threat. It's just truth. Like gravity, like sunrise. Some things just are." They sat in comfortable silence as dawn began painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. Outside, the Brotherhood waited, patient as stones, loyal as the tide. When Nomad was released 2 days later, ribs wrapped and pain managed, 80 motorcycles formed an escort that rolled through Reno like a parade celebrating something bigger than victory, something closer to vindication. The $50,000 went into the charter's community fund, distributed to brothers who'd fallen on hard times, to widows of fallen riders, to causes that aligned with the code they lived by. Nomad kept nothing for himself except the knowledge that mattered most. He belonged to something larger than himself, something that endured beyond individual lives and temporary struggles. Murphy's Auto Parts saw a surge in business over the following months, bikers from 5 states stopping by to thank the old mechanic who'd helped one of their own when he'd needed it most. Murphy never charged a brother full price again, and they never asked him to. the relationship balanced by mutual respect and the understanding that kindness creates ripples that spread far beyond their origin. Yuri Petrov never quite recovered his swagger. The memory of kneeling before the brotherhood seared into his psyche like a brand. He moved cautiously through Reno's underworld after that, always aware of the motorcycles that rumbled past, always wondering if today would be the day he crossed another invisible line. Mikhail Petrov, in the months before his death from pancreatic cancer, told his grandchildren about the night 80 bikers rode up to his compound, seeking justice for one beaten man. He told them about codes that transcended law, about brotherhood that money couldn't buy, about the importance of knowing which wars to fight and which to avoid. Respect, he told them in his hospital bed, his empire crumbling as his body failed, is earned through actions, not words. And there are organizations, brotherhoods, that have earned more respect through honor and loyalty than we ever will through fear and violence. Nomad rode for 7 more years before age and arthritis finally forced him to hang up his cut. He spent those years mentoring prospects, teaching them the code, explaining why they'd ridden 80 strong to answer one man's call. He told them about the beating in the parking lot, about bleeding on cold asphalt, about the moment he heard engines approaching like cavalry cresting the hill in some old western. "We're not a gang," he'd say. The same words spoken by countless brothers before him, and countless more to come. "We're a family bound by something stronger than blood. We're a code made manifest, riding through a world that's forgotten what codes mean. And when they touch one of us, they learn what we've always known. Brotherhood isn't a word, it's a force of nature." The Harley that was stolen and returned rode for another 40,000 miles before mechanical failure finally claimed what violence could not. It sits now in the Charter's clubhouse, a memorial to the night when justice wore leather and rode on wheels, when 5 men learned the true cost of their ignorance, when brotherhood proved itself not through words, but through thunder rolling down from the hills like an answer to prayer. The Nevada wind still cuts through Reno's industrial district. Murphy's Auto Parts still stands, thriving now, protected by invisible walls built from respect and gratitude. And on certain nights, when the moon hangs low and the desert air carries sounds from distant highways, you can still hear the echo of that ride, 80 engines speaking in unison, telling a story about loyalty and justice and the price of touching what should never be touched. They called him Nomad, a lone rider who learned he was never truly alone. They called themselves a brotherhood, and that night they proved what the word really meant. If you have enjoyed this story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.